Hey everyone, U.S. immigration lawyer Michael Ashoori here, and in today's video, I'm going to share with you two case studies of two separate clients of ours that were able to get their E-2 visa approved. The first case is an instance of a client that got their E-2 visa approved as an initial application for an E-2 visa, and what was interesting was that the amount that they actually invested and put at risk was much lower than we typically recommend, but he was still able to get the approval. And the second case was an E2 renewal, where basically the client had been very much affected by COVID and his sales and his business went down tremendously. But in the last year before the approval, he was able to pick things up and the E2 renewal application was ultimately approved. So in a moment, I'm gonna have attorney Shruti Bali join me on this meeting and we're gonna discuss both of these cases in detail. I'm very excited to share this information with you, so let's jump right in. As a quick overview, the E2 visa is an investor visa where somebody basically invests in a business in the United States. They could either start a brand new company or they can purchase an existing business. And based on making an investment in that company, they can qualify for the E2 visa to be able to direct and develop that business in the United States. The E2 visa is an incredible option for entrepreneurs. I talk about it regularly because I've seen many people have such a tremendous outcome through this visa program where they now have a shot at achieving the American dream. So I'm a big fan of the E2 visa, and just to go over some of the requirements very quickly, one requirement is that you must be from a country that has an E2 treaty with the United States. Not all countries qualify. There are many countries that do qualify, but certain major countries do not. So you have to make sure that you have a passport to a country that has an E2 treaty with the United States. You also have to make a substantial investment in the business. Now, what is substantial? There's no dollar amount that is listed in the regulations, but we typically recommend an investment of at least $100,000 because in our experience, we've seen at that amount or more, you're more likely to have a successful outcome than when the investment is less than that amount. Another requirement is that the funds must be at risk. This means that you can't just deposit the money into the business's operating account and leave it there and say that you made an investment. Because if you could just pull that money right back out, then is it really invested? Is it really at risk? That's often the position that the immigration officer will take when they're analyzing your case. So the investment funds must be at risk. Interestingly, in one of the case studies that we're going to talk about in just a few moments, we're going to mention a case where a large portion of the investment funds were not technically put at risk, but the client was still able to get approval. So we'll talk about that in a few moments. So another requirement for the E2 visa is that the investment funds must come from a lawful source. You have to be able to track that you earned or you received the money through a lawful means. Another requirement is that the business must be an active for-profit business. So if you just purchase a home and rent it out to somebody, that's not an active business. That's more of a passive business. So that doesn't really qualify for an E2 visa. Another requirement for the E2 visa is that the business must be real and operating. What this means is that when you apply for the E2 visa, the business must either already be operational or it must be on the verge of becoming operational. So if you still have many steps to take before the business can start being operational, then it's likely too early for you to apply for the visa. And what I mean by this is, for example, let's say you're starting a restaurant. You can't apply for the visa when you haven't yet leased the premises for the restaurant, you haven't yet gotten the furniture up, you haven't yet secured what the menu is going to be and all that kind of stuff. When you're applying for the E2 visa, all of these things should basically be done. You should have the premises leased. You should have any necessary licenses or permits that you need to operate the business. You should have everything done so that the business is either already running or once you get your E2 visa, you're going to come to the United States and you're able to start running the business right away. You shouldn't be applying for an E2 visa when you still have a lot of different tasks to complete before the business can operate. So those are just some of the requirements for the E2 visa. I want to jump into these case studies, so let's get started. We're joined by one of our incredible attorneys, Shruti Bali, and we're going to go over a couple of interesting cases that we've recently gotten approved. The first case that we're going to talk about, it's an E2 visa case. We typically like to recommend that the E2 investor will invest at least $100,000 and that they put that amount at risk, meaning that they actually spend those funds. But interestingly, in this first case study that we're going to talk about, the investor didn't put all the money at risk, yet we were still able to get a successful outcome. So that'll be the first case that we talk about, and Shruti will explain kind of the play-by-play on that one. And then we're going to go to a second case, which is actually an E2 renewal case. And the E2 renewal case is interesting because this individual had a business that was decimated by COVID. And so their overall operations went down significantly. And when that happens, it can make getting an E2 renewal approved much more challenging. Yet, towards the last year prior to the renewal, they started to see an upward trend, and we were ultimately able to secure the approval. So we'll get Shruti's insights on that case as well. But why don't we start with the first case? Again, it was a case where the applicant didn't put a whole lot at risk, at least pursuant to what we typically recommend. So, Shruti, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview on that particular case, what the business model was, and we'll start there.
Hi, everybody. So the first case that I want to talk about was a corporation that was the LLC that was established last year. I want to say around June or July of 2022. And it was established to operate a unique homemade food delivery marketplace. It would create and manage an online platform and a mobile app that would connect local home-based cooks and individuals looking to order and eat high-quality food. So the person had a background in technology. He had project management. He has a ton of project management experience based on his previous employment, and which is what he was able to bring to this company. Now, his startup investment was close to $140,000, the money that he was transferred from the treaty country to U.S. enterprise here in the U.S. However, if you look at the breakdown of it, what he had actually spent at the time of application with less than half of it, which I would say was roughly about $40,000 to $50,000. Why? Because majority of it, almost $90,000, was put away for salary of his employees. Now, if you read the regulations, it says you should have spent the money or be in the process of spending the money. So this is a classic case of being in the process of spending that money. Obviously, if some of your investment was put away for employee salaries, unlike something like rent or marketing, you cannot prepay these things. You will pay them during the course of business. And if your business is something such as this business was, if you need employees right away, and I will get to that in a moment, this is operating capital that you need at the time you start your business. This is not something that you can wait to pay from your profits. And this particular company, not only did it need employees, but actually went ahead to show that the funds are committed, actually went ahead and hired not just one, but two employees at the time of application, had agreements, had pay stubs, had payrolls to show that they need these employees. They were in the business plan. Their need was justified in the business plan, which in turn justified the need to put away that capital to pay their salaries as the business moved on, which is why we were able to count those funds in the total investment amount of $140,000 and be able to justify that. Was it smooth sailing? I wouldn't say so. We did get a request for evidence from the consulate in Canada when we filed the case. About 3 weeks later, when they finished their review, we did get a request from the US consulate in Toronto saying, show us exactly where this money was spent. I was not surprised to see such a request, but the good thing was they gave the applicant the option to either provide them beforehand or bring it with him to the interview. And the interview was about 2 months from the date that he got this request. So he got time to gather all the documents to show where the money was spent, and also to gather really strong documentation to show that this business is real and operational. So you have to remember, in an E2, there are several important components. One important component is how much you're investing, where the money is coming from. There's another important component showing that your company is real and operational. It's a real business, and you have to meet this as well. And this guy had some serious documentation to show that a business was real and operational. He had a binder for about 200, 300 pages. And he had everything from payroll taxes to financial statements, to employee agreements, to pay stubs. Every invoice for every penny was counted to show where that $40,000, $50,000 was already spent and where the rest of the money is going. And he took it all with him to the consulate so the officer can see for himself that this is a real business. And these are not just numbers that we have provided as part of an application. These numbers are real. He has spent this money, and this is where he's actually planning to spend the money. He's not making it up.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. And basically, just to recap, the applicant transferred over approximately $140,000, but at the time of the application,
Time of the application, he had spent 40,000. At the time of the interview, he had spent another 10, so closer to 50.
typically we need to show that the funds are put at risk. Typically, if the investment funds are just sitting in the business's operating account, then their USCIS or the consular officer that's reviewing the case could make the claim that that additional money that's just sitting in the operating account is not really at risk. It's possible that they won't consider that amount as being invested. But interestingly, it appears, Shruti, based on what you're saying, that because this individual had employees already hired and had been making payments for their salaries, that including those additional funds that hadn't yet been spent was a stronger argument than just parking the funds in the operating account without any kind of plan for spending it. Is that what you observed? Or
Exactly. And another thing I want to add, and it's a very important thing that I want to add, he didn't just hire employees for the sake of hiring employees. Like he didn't hire an admin assistant. He hired employees that the business needed. For example, his business needs a marketing director. So he actually went ahead and hired a marketing director because that was a need for his business, which is why he was probably further able to justify. Another important thing, Michael, I want to bring up is that the consulate probably also sees as to whether the amount of money that you have spent is substantial enough to create the business that you want to start. So the substantiality test does come into play a lot of the time when you're filing these E2 applications, because if you can show that the money that you have spent is all you need to start that kind of business, then that could also be taken into consideration while deciding upon your E2 visa application. So a lot of things do come together. We lawyers like to say totality of circumstances. So this is a perfect example of a totality of circumstances that came into play and got this particular applicant an approval.
amazing. So again, just to clarify with everybody, we always like to see the funds actually spent. That's ideal for us when we can have a clean process where basically the individual that's applying for the E2 visa opens up their operating account for their business. They transfer a substantial amount into that operating account, and then they spend those funds toward the business. They buy inventory, they buy supplies, they prepay their lease, or whatever else is needed for their business. The E2 regulations allow for a certain small portion of funds to be held in the business's operating account as operating capital, but typically we like to see the vast majority of the funds being actually spent. It makes it much easier to demonstrate that the funds are at risk. But in this particular case, and the reason why we're sharing this particular case study with you is that it's just interesting that we were able to secure an approval for one of our clients that had such a large component of their overall investment sitting in their operating account. So thank you so much for sharing that particular case with us, Shruti. And let's move to another case. And I talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the video, where it's an E2 renewal client. So in this particular case, the individual already had an E2 visa and he was going to renew the visa. And typically when you're renewing your E2 visa, you basically want to still show that the business is operating and it's profitable. The business is not marginal. A marginal business is basically a business that's just supporting the investor and their family. And it's not really generating a positive economic benefit to the community. Basically, how we combat a finding of marginality is we show that the business is either very profitable or the business has hired other employees, so it's creating an economic benefit to the community, or a combination of both of those factors. But in this particular case, COVID had basically decimated the business, and we were still able to secure the E2 approval. So I would love to get Shruti's take on what happened in that case. So if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. So this particular company was affected by COVID. They were in the business of providing high quality green building systems such as green roofs, living walls, solar electric panels, and we all know that these type of businesses, just like any other business, a part of the construction industry, were really supremely affected by COVID. He had losses. He had to let go of his employees in somewhere in between 2020 and 2021, and then come 2022, he has to file for his renewal. Now, the good news about this case was that in the beginning of 2022, he actually was able to hire an employee because his business sort of picked up. He was able to sign agreements. He was able to sign partnership agreements with vendors to show that the company has work available in the future. He had these things going for him. His numbers obviously picked up by the time it came time to apply for the E2 renewal. And we were able to then explain to the consulate. We actually had an explanation in our application saying, hey, yes, he got affected, but here is the documentation to show that they are coming back from it. We have tax returns to show better numbers. We have financial statements to show better numbers. Here is an employee agreement to show that he's been able to hire employees, pay stubs, payroll taxes. And also we were able to produce, submit financial statements. If you look at the renewal process in Canada, they don't generally ask for financial statements. But I actually went ahead and submitted them because I wanted to show how strong the business is doing financially compared to where it was a year ago. And all of this did come into play, and he was finally able to secure an E2 visa.
Amazing. So it seems like the way that we put forth the case was demonstrating the upward trend of how the business was recovering and showing the new trajectory that was taking place, demonstrating that they were coming out of the slump, which seems to be what helped secure the approval as well. So thank you all for joining us on that meeting. I hope you enjoyed these case studies. I hope you got a lot of valuable information from them. If you like these case study type videos, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to know if you like more of this type of content, more of these types of videos. It'll be very helpful for us. So again, thank you so much for watching. More videos to come, and I'll see you on the next one.